let me get some superstar Zimbabweans onto professional tribes and just find out a little bit about them, where they are, what they're doing, and really just start to raise awareness of some of the greatest exports in the way of human capital. So today we have Kevin. Kevin, would you like to say hi to our audience, introduce yourself, let them know a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you very much. Hello, Tribe. My name is Kevin Kachidza. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Selflimiting. We're a software company based in Vancouver, Canada. And yeah, I'm originally from Harare. My rural home is, of course, KwaMtoko. But yes, I find myself out here on the west coast of Canada. And although, I typically introduce myself as a founder and CEO, that's something that I've had to become accustomed to over the past 12 months, because exactly 12 months and 2 weeks ago, I sat in this very room without a job. I was unemployed. I was one of the many, many bankers that had been sort of swept aside by the great COVID layoffs of the year 2020. And I'd spent a number of months, like a lot of people, being concerned about, what was happening in the world as far as, the health situation, the situation that the world finds itself in right now, not to mention the fact of, not having a job. And this situation persisted for a couple of months. And, even with everything else that was going on in the world and all the uncertainty. But there came a point when I realized that, my journey didn't take me from Harare to the UK at one stage, to the US, and finally to Canada. For me to be sitting at home, applying for job after job after job, and really hoping that, somebody would give me a seat at the table. And, one of the great things about having that much time available to yourself is you have an opportunity to reflect not only on your own kind of strengths and weaknesses, areas that you can improve yourself, areas that perhaps you can look at as far as career progression. But I also found myself with the ability to look at the way that people were trained within my sector, the way that people, that learning and development programs were rolled out within the financial services space. And I discovered that essentially the system is broken, because with the old ways of working, training was very much focused on in-person human-to-human interaction. You'd go into the classroom or the boardroom, and it would be introduction to money laundering or anti-money laundering 101. And that would be your first month at the bank. And, you'd proceed on that basis. And finally, you'd get into the production floor or whatever it is, wherever it is that you are. And you'd have, side-by-side coaching. None of that is possible anymore. So I sat there, I reflected on the situation, and I realized that this situation was not going to change. The old ways of training, learning, and development were gone, and they were gone forever. And as a former trainer within the financial services space, I felt that there was an opportunity there. And fortunately, the big turning point for me when it came to taking my idea to incorporating a company to getting that first investor, which really then kicks off the rest of your development. That for me came through an institution called the Founder Institute. Now, the Founder Institute is the world's largest idea stage tech accelerator. And it is built exactly for that, to take folks that have ideas, typically folks that are employed and they want to transition to becoming entrepreneurs. But it can really be anybody, anyone who has an idea that potentially could solve a problem for a very large number of people. And that is how Selflimiting was born. So I founded an artificial intelligence company, and we build digital training officers. We deploy them through an e-learning platform that we've built and customized ourselves, and it's built for the new ways of learning. And that's my background.
Fantastic. Yeah. Right, there's so much content in there. I'm needing to dissect that and kind of really deep dive on the bits that strike me as most interesting. So plug to the accelerator program, noted. I hope that you get special dispensation for plugging their services there. But beyond that, really, Kevin, I think the theme that obviously a lot of people talk about coming out of COVID or sort of transitioning from the hardcore COVID era is this idea of resilience and pivoting. And, most of the people that I have in the hot seat are really talking about this process of almost relearning themselves and understanding what they're good at beyond what they've been exposed to in their professional ladder to that point. Yeah. In your case, you've done something quite clever in that you've kind of used the foundation of what you're already doing from the sounds of things to create what I'm hoping is going to be a massive empire that just takes over the world in terms of learning and development for you. But walk me through your stages of identifying what your next chapter would look and feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my next chapter in terms of going from being an employee to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it takes, for me, the first step was having that idea, and that process will vary from person to person, but typically it's founded on an awareness of your own capabilities, your own knowledge, your own background and experience, and what you have in your background and experience that could be turned into a business. Now, my background happens to be anti-money laundering, fraud detection, and from time to time, national security issues like anti-terror financing. Fortunately, in Canada, not that often, not in my experience anyways, well, not allocated to me
sure.
That often. But I sat there, as I said, in this room without a job, thinking that how is it possible that I cannot turn this background in national security issues, fraud detection, money laundering into a viable and sustainable business. Now, the next step that I had to overcome was the self-limiting beliefs. And as Africans, as people in general, we need to have these conversations more often about self-limiting beliefs. And I felt I was quite a confident and capable person, and that all I really needed was a job in order to get onto the next stage. But I had these self-limiting beliefs, which are actually founded in how we're educated, not as Africans, but as people. Sometime post World War II, education was delivered in a way which was intended to serve the needs of economies at that time, to provide endless streams of workers who could essentially clock in at 9 o'clock, clock out at 5 o'clock, and produce certain measurable output in support
Ordism 101.
There you go. Exactly. That's right. It.
Right.
And so, I think we often don't realize how much we internalize that until we're freed from that kind of environment. In my case, because, well, didn't have a choice, your contract has come to an end. We're sorry about that. But I needed to understand that success was not me becoming a successful consultant in that area of my career. Yes, it could be that way. I could probably live a fairly comfortable life that way. But it took a mindset which realized that by being an individual consultant, by going out there and, hey, maybe one day I'll earn $200,000 a year and all that sort of thing, flashy car, good times. That is one path that you can take. And I respect, people that do take that path. And hey, I recently was on that path. But there is a greater world of opportunity out there, which comes from solving problems for hundreds of people, thousands of people. And once you get to the stage where you realize that a certain piece of technology that you have access to, or that you can create, or partnerships that you can create and people that can help you do that, can help you solve this problem, not just for people in your neighborhood, not just people on the West Coast, not just people in North America, but people on every continent, and in my case, in the case of my startup, in 50 different languages. Once I had the infrastructure and the mindset to appreciate that there was an opportunity which went beyond being just a really great Canadian company, that's when the opportunities which have come to me recently really started to come to fruition. And I'm really grateful for the people that supported me, that gave me that understanding, that prompted me to think bigger than my original kind of goals when it came to starting a business. I set out a year ago to raise $300,000 and build a company that will become a really good software company in Western Canada. And we've now moved on to another stage of expectations, let's put it that way.
Well, that's he's getting more money, people. That's what that means. More investors.
Oh, well, we as a founder, it should always be assumed that I'm looking for money, whether it's from government grants, hiring grants, or from Silicon Valley. We're always doing something. Yeah.
And tell me, so you talk about having a robust network of people supporting you. Were there any Zimbabweans within that ecosystem?
Yes, now is the time when we delve into Kevin Kachidza's current situation and how it didn't lend itself to that kind of support.
Sure.
I live in Western Canada, in Vancouver specifically. Vancouver is a beautiful city. It is, just a wonderful place to be. I've been here for 7 years, and it is a great place. Everything that you've heard about Vancouver that's good is true. The bad things, yeah, a few of them are also true as well. We do have a very big homelessness problem, and this summer we had a really big problem with floods. Right. But otherwise, it's just a great place. However, the Zimbabwean population in British Columbia, where I live, and in Vancouver, as far as I know, is not significant. To put it into numbers, I've met 2 Zimbabweans in Vancouver in the 7 years that I've lived here. Now, if I lived in Toronto, if I lived in Montreal, where I used to live, yeah, sure. I mean, that's that would be a greater prospect. However, where I have found that my network has remained intact is through frankly one social network and one social network alone, and that's LinkedIn. It's useful for me to make it known that every single dollar that I raised initially for my startup all came from LinkedIn. And it came from following a formula which teaches you to talk about your business and all of the progress that you're making, however small, however medium, until you get to those really big steps forward. And it was by announcing things like, hey, I've just been accepted into this great program that takes people from having an idea to being entrepreneurs. Hey, I'm #1 in the program for the 3rd week in a row. People pay attention to that. And if you're like me and you take a look at your LinkedIn stats when you do your social media posts, you realize that the reach of social media and the ability of social media to keep us connected to vital networks can be of value at the right place at the right time when you're looking to make that move. And that is exactly what happened with me. A Zimbabwean, well, actually more than one Zimbabwean, who I hadn't spoken to in a couple of years just because of location and COVID, all that sort of thing. They reached out and they said, hey, I haven't spoken to you in a while. It looks like you're doing some interesting, promising things. I have some folks who you should speak to. Wonderful. And the rest is becoming history.
Wonderful. And I asked this deliberately because I think as a culture, as a community in the diaspora, I don't think that we're great at propelling each other forward. I think, Zimbabweans are notorious for the moment you do anything, there's some scandal that's linked to it, i.e. he's gone and robbed a bank, which is why he's successful, or he sold his soul to the devil, hence why he's got the investors coming through.
No other explanation.
Absolutely. So yeah. I think from my perspective, really, it's always great to hear that you do still have those elements within our society that are helpful, that are looking to make connections. And I think I'm fortunate at this point to have a network of some really kick-ass Zimbos who literally, if there's a room, there's a door a mile away that they feel you ought to be walking in, they're steering you in that direction. So here's the hope that you do the same, actually, and you're championing, you're kind of living that philosophy yourself with any Zimbabweans that are within your network.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it does feel a little bit surreal to me because of the recency of this progress. But fortunately, this is not really a world that I was unfamiliar with. Those who've known me the longest will know that I once worked as Strive Masiwa's executive assistant. I worked as a spokesperson for Econet Wireless. And I'll always be grateful to Strive for the access that he gave me to his meetings, his networks, his way of doing things, the decision-making process that he was undertaking at the time. And it was only when I realized that he was, roughly the age that I'm at now when he hired me, that I truly understood what was going on there and the direct link between working for, a Zimbabwean, a very successful Zimbabwean, and the initial progress that I'm making right now. It was having exposure to that world at a young age that, made it familiar to me when it became, when it was my turn to start making progress in that space. The other thing that I'll always point out, when people ask me, how did you do this? Because there are a lot of people, even here in Canada, who are pleasantly surprised by what's happened. We know the narrative of Black startups, that it was always very difficult for, Black startups to raise capital. And, founders, were always questioned in terms of their background and their ability. But, I think it was a mixture of, just the timing and motivation that I had, the opportunity that I had, which propelled that forward. But the one thing that I'll always point to when people ask me how this was done and, tell me about your journey, is the culture of education that we had in Zimbabwe, going back, as far as I can recall anyways. We always knew that, politics aside, many of our leaders were educated. And certainly as a young man growing up in Zimbabwe and going to, Courtney Salou School in Greendale, and then to Peterhouse, and, eventually a little stint at UZ as well before I left for the UK. I will always, credit that culture of education, that, the fact that we normalized high performance in education very, very early on. And for a lot of people, that's what I credit, when it comes to the discussion about how did you get here? How did you even think about this? What did you lean on to persevere in order to get to where you got to? That's where
incredible. And Kevin, I'm loving what you're saying here, because what it's conjured in my mind is this idea that you've got a young, impressionable Zimbabwean leaving home, seeking their fortunes abroad. That transition from the way of doing things in Zim doesn't always translate very well in the West, for argument's sake. And I think with that, those self-limiting beliefs that you referenced earlier on start kicking in, because you're not necessarily encouraged to think outside the box. I think for all the credit that we give to our educational system, and captains of industry all over the globe happen to be Zimbabwean, that says a lot, right? One, though, has to question the ease at which you're able to then survive outside of that context, where authority looks and feels different, it's treated differently. You're waiting to be praised and to be promoted, and you don't necessarily have that training that says, actually, you've got to go and grab it because no one's going to invite you to the table. In fact, you need to start making your own table for crying out loud. So walk me through, or at least try to educate someone who might be thinking about moving abroad, what they need in their toolkit to survive life outside Zim.
Yeah. Wow. This is it's probably best explained through summarizing my journey when I left Zim. I left Zim for South Africa, and the kind of challenges that Zimbabweans face in South Africa are the same challenges that I faced. It didn't really matter how educated you were, how good you were at anything. There were other considerations at play, and if you were fortunate, you were fortunate and you got into certain spaces. But if you didn't, it was not a reflection of your own abilities. And that's something that I really had to tell myself and internalize, because, at certain stages, it didn't make any sense whatsoever. And when I got to Canada, the very first job that I had was first full-time job I had was a customer service agent at Capital One Bank, in the fraud department. Now, I had gone from being an executive assistant to one of the most successful Zimbabweans there is, to working at a call center. Right. And I say that with no shame right now, because I can connect it to where I am now, and there is another story to be told there. But you have to be prepared for to work yourself into the space that you want to be in. But I also think it's an opportunity for folks to reflect on, the whole culture of, employment equals success, right? Employment is great, don't get me wrong. I employ people, and they're great people, and I hope that we'll be successful together. But I've chosen a different path, one which recognizes that true success can only come through ownership of a business, of a product, of a process that belongs to you. And that's what we're pursuing. And let's hope it'll be successful.
And it's
because
this
that's
ownership mindset that I think, look, as a bit like we're talking about Fordist models earlier on, we're trained to be good employees, right? We're trained to be obedient human beings.
yes.
Ownership isn't something that is second nature to us as a culture, as a people. So I do implore everybody to really just think bigger than, and of course, people's personal circumstances will dictate what they do, right? It may not be the right season for somebody to go down the entrepreneurial route, but certainly worth kind of thinking about how you take better control of your destiny. And when we start talking about Black issues in the West, for instance, being a Black man in Canada, in London, etc., you are literally at the mercy of someone who may have who may be predisposed to biases against you by virtue of your name not sounding English enough, or I don't like your accent, would be enough sometimes for you to get ridden off. Let's talk about assimilation. Let's talk about, and I call it assimilation because that's what it is to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you feel you needed to assimilate in order to be accepted in any country that you've lived in outside them?
Yes. Particularly in two countries that have given me a lot in terms of my personal development, and so I'll always be grateful for that. But specifically in South Africa and in Quebec, in Canada. Now, that was,
I thought you were going to say London or something.
London,
Quebec, he says. All right, I'm
yes,
ready to hear this one. Yeah,
London. It's too bad we only have an hour. London is a lovely place. I was there in October last year, but I think that I've been in North America for so long that some of my focus has drifted to places like New York and Toronto, and of course back home, because we tend to watch from afar and just see things go down at home and wish we were part of it, or we could contribute in some way. Interesting fact about Vancouver before we move on to your next question. Geographically, there is no place on this earth which is further away from Vancouver, Canada, than Durban, South Africa. So I'm literally on the other side of the earth when it comes to home. That's just one of the peculiarities about British Columbia, but it's a great place, and a place I found opportunity. So we can talk more about that.
Okay, we're not going to skirt over my question though. What is it about Quebec that made you feel you needed to assimilate? You had started building up a narrative to say there were two places that might have influenced, I guess, Kevin 2022.
Oh, yes. In terms of assimilation, well, it's in Quebec, it's about speaking French, and I, like many Zimbabweans, I did my high school French, and I was quite proud of myself. But then I also went and did first year university business French, and I spent my entire first year in Montreal working an English speaking job. Well, it was English and Spanish speaking, but that's another story. Working English.
How many stories does this man have?
I have a few. Hey, like many Zimbabweans, I've been
absolutely
been traveling, and but there is a very strong culture of and I actually agree with this perspective that because French is the dominant language in Quebec, that folks who move to Quebec should make an effort to speak French.
Right.
So not the kind of assimilation that I guess the world typically thinks about, but it was a concerted effort by me to get gainful employment as well, because bilingual folks get access to other opportunities. But it was also a personal development goal, and and at the time, my girlfriend at the time was French speaking, didn't speak English, so there was that too.
Sure. And to what extent do you believe that folk coming from the West to do business in, say, Zimbabwe or other parts of Africa ought to do the same, kind of learn the vernacular? The Chinese do this really well, but do you feel that there's a reciprocity in this model of feeling one needs to assimilate?
I know that it's a tough topic, and one which I've gained an additional appreciation for recently, because in my founder journey, I've had to look at we'll put it this way. This should come as not a surprise to anybody that when you reach a certain level of progress as a founder, there are a lot of countries around the world that will welcome you to set up your business there. And we're about to announce, a partnership in the United States, which will give us access to the US market. Unfortunately, I can't announce it right now. I've just assured my partners that they'll make the announcement and then I'll retweet. So in considering where I will, set up offices or operations or presence, or even just hire people, I've been taking a close look at the European Union. It is the next logical progression of my learning and development product, particularly when you consider that some of what my team produces is basically a language play. And what I mean by language play is that it's found a market in North America because it's well delivered and it's in English. It can find a market in Germany if we just translate it into German. And so I spent some time in Berlin and Frankfurt, and I've tried to learn German, but my German is not the best. Mein Deutsch ist nicht gut. But having had that experience, and fairly recently, it has had, it's allowed me to think about issues of assimilation and how difficult it can be. What I'm saying in a roundabout way for my own experience in Quebec was that it wasn't that difficult for me over time. Zimbabweans tend to, as I said earlier on, have had this culture of learning anyways, and I just saw it as another challenge. And when you work in customer service and your job is, English speaking and French speaking, you'll be surprised how quickly you become, quite, fairly fluent in the language.
Wonderful. You spoke earlier on about Strive. Is it fair to assume that he is a role model to you? And who else would be in that kind of arena of people you've looked up to and who've inspired you to do what you do?
Oh, absolutely, Strive Masiyiwa. I mean, it's the numbers speak for themselves in terms of the number of folks that we have who are from our background, who are from Zimbabwe, who have achieved as much as Strive has, and certainly, having had access to that sort of mentorship, and it really was mentorship, in my early 20s, that really shaped my capabilities and my confidence and even my network, the places that I could, that I had access to just based on, on that factor. There are people to this day who remember, a transaction that I helped with at Econet, many years ago. And so, yeah, definitely, Strive and other captains of industry in Zimbabwe, some of whom I haven't seen for a while, but knowing that they achieved certain things, and many of them, of course, well above a level that, I could even consider as being possible this year. It is useful to have that knowledge that there are folks who, are from your background, who went through the same things that you did, who grew up in the same environment, and who've achieved these amazing things. And certainly that's one of the things that I'm seeking to do, now as a Zimbabwe-born Canadian, or, a Canadian, is to instill in young people the idea that if this guy can grow up in Africa, go through 2 or 3 different countries before he found a home in Canada, go through the whole, minimum wage to not minimum wage to thinking you're doing well because, you've got all of the branding of success that comes with, working with these big institutions. I mean, yeah, that's all great, but there's more beyond that. And I hope to share with young people from whatever background in Canada that is possible. And because of my story and because of how people in the West tend to perceive Africa, knowing that I'm from Africa and I'm doing these things, I hope helps in some way to help change the narrative about who we are as Africans and what we can achieve and what we are achieving.
Well, I predict that your catchment will extend beyond Canada, because I'm sure there are kids all over the world who may well look to you as a source of inspiration. Just keeping an eye now on the clock, Kevin, let's start wrapping up if we could. So this show is entitled The Globalization of Zimbabwean Talent. I'm quite curious to know what your thoughts are on brain drain, on the export of Zim talent, without necessarily going into politics too much for obvious reasons. Don't want to disappear. What are your thoughts about, your interactions or exposure to Zimbabweans? What is brand Zimbabwe to you?
Brand Zimbabwe has so much going for it. And it is most evident to me whenever I'm in South Africa. The reason being that, look, we have our challenges there. We have our challenges in every country in which the diaspora is found. But there is an appreciation amongst those who work with Zimbabweans the most about a certain type of work ethic and a commonality of how we approach work, by and large, not everyone, of course, but how most of us approach work. That is, that is exactly the kind of thing that, as a CEO, as a hiring manager, that's what I want. That's what I look for. And it's shared by people from other nations as well. But it is something that, is easily identifiable in brand Zimbabwe. And so, what I would encourage folks to think about is how we can take all of the resources that we have as a nation, all of that, common understanding, common learning, common reputation for doing outstanding work, and not only create great employees for companies in other countries, but also, great enterprises that themselves are born out of Zimbabwe, that don't have to leave Zimbabwe. I can tell you right now, it is my sincere belief that I would have reached the level that I'm at if I'd stayed in Zimbabwe rather than going out to the West. Better late than never, I guess, but it's, there is so much opportunity back home. And right now, as I speak, and I say this as a startup mentor at Founder Institute as well, if I were an African founder solving problems for hundreds of thousands of Africans today, there are folks who would cut checks for that sort of enterprise within the next 4 weeks.
But people don't know this. So people don't know this. I think that the general belief is that money doesn't flow to Black entrepreneurs or to Black startups. And I guess there's something to be demystified here. If your view is actually that people kind of waiting, what is it that Zimbabwe or African entrepreneurs are getting wrong that's not attractive capital?
Well, I think we also have to realize that the tide has changed over the past couple of years. And it really, and it's very important for folks to understand this, especially folks who are not in North America. Certainly, this is my perspective. But the an incident that happened in May of 2020, it was actually May 26, 2020, changed a lot of the narratives around corporations, ESG, diversity and inclusion, support for Black communities. That started to change on the 26th of May, 2020. And the reason that changed, well, two things happened on that day. First of all, that's when, that's the day that George Floyd sadly lost his life. Personally, it also happened to be the day that I lost my job.
I thought you were going to say that was my birthday and the stars aligned and sure.
Actually, it was kind of like a birthday because it gave me a gift that then resulted in something so much better. But yeah, that was the day that myself and other contractors at a leading financial institution were given our 30 days notice. And I happened to be the spokesperson for the Black community within that bank at the time. And so, on one day I got my notice, and then 2 days later, people were rushing in saying, can you speak to groups of 20 and 30 and 50 people about what's happening? And so, that was kind of a surreal moment, just all of that. And seeing the last days of how things were before that, being part of the discussion and telling people that, look, this is not just a moment in time. This is not just one person who, things are changing. Those days are gone. And I remember actually even being heckled when when I was trying to give, explain what the whole George Floyd situation meant. And, I felt that, hey, as a national spokesperson for this particular financial institution, perhaps, you should be listening rather than heckling. Turns out that person
on what basis?
Oh, on the basis that,
all lives matter.
Yeah, of course. There you go. In 3 words. So, but we one of the things that I took away from South Africa is a spirit of how to move on from those sorts of things, a spirit of understanding that there's some people who need to be educated in these things, some people who genuinely don't know, and some people who are ignorant by design.
Right.
But whatever, obstacles that, we face as people, as Zimbabweans, as Africans, as Black people around the world, I know that, we can be successful if we just have the tools to get us to the place that we need to be. And, I'll always be an advocate for entrepreneurship. I'll always be an advocate for, getting that training, getting that degree, that background, going into your first job, working your way into middle management, and then becoming an entrepreneur, if that's what you want to do. But I think that there are more and more, Zimbabweans, Black Zimbabweans who are becoming successful outside of Africa as well. That is, providing a pathway for all Africans to follow along the same path. And let's not forget that there have been Africans that came before us that have become successful, that that have given me the kind of opportunities and the confidence, that has allowed me to make the small successes and the small progress made today.
And I think that the whole diversity and inclusion, George Floyd movement really does resonate with every Black person, I'm sure, dotted around the globe. What we've all been a little bit weary of is the euphoria that comes with just getting on this bandwagon and being seen as a corporate to be saying the right things, but whether that actually translates to action is where the debate starts to get a little bit interesting. So I do think that the steam has worn off in certain cases. It was trendy then to be Black Lives Matter. We've got these great diversity and inclusion policies, etc., but I'm not quite sure that they've been maintained. So it'd be great to kind of do some sort of an audit on this, if one could, albeit anecdotally. But beyond that, Kevin, I think, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. I think there's so much to pick from what you said. What I've picked up is Zimbabwean boy sets out into the big bad world to seek his fortunes, lands himself in Canada, having gone through different countries along the way. The bit that I think we ought to give credit to, we talk about the entrepreneurial spirit, which is a beautiful thing. The corporate world gives critical training for a person who wants to then break off into business. So I think Zimbabwe's got a culture of almost looking down at people with corporate jobs, with real jobs, because they're not business people, they're not wheeler dealing. But actually, there's a lot of credit that ought to be given to the sorts of discipline, the training. It's almost like going to military, right? There are things that you learn that you take into the world that actually propel you. So I would hope that, there is a holistic view. It's not for everybody, clearly. And if you were to leave with a parting shot for our audience, what would it be? Again, Zimbabwean surviving outside Zimbabwe, what is your greatest piece of advice that you could impart before we call time?
Lean into, the skill and education and experience that you have. And don't let anybody tell you that because you're from Africa, because you're from Zimbabwe, that your skill and experience is any less valuable than anybody that you see around you. My business is hopefully on track to become the fastest growing Black founded business in the history of Western Canada.
Go on, Kevin.
It requires execution, however. It requires follow through on, a number of things. But the fact that we're on that track, and that I came from that environment where, we went to the same schools, we were in the same environment, means that it's possible for all of us. It does require a formula, however, when it comes to how you approach business, and that formula may differ according to your sector and what you're good at and what you're looking at. But, seek help from folks who have done what it is that you're seeking to achieve, and know that these things are possible. To even greater extents than anything that I could even achieve in the next 2-3 years.
Wonderful, Kevin. I wish you absolute success and absolutely everything that you set out to do. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and really quite inspiring to keep hearing these stories of Zimbabweans that are out there making their mark in the world. I think you're a prime example of that. We thank you for being on our Professional Tribes. And we shall be inviting you back if you'll have us to talk more, maybe about the Internet of Things or about some techie related, because I am actually going to do some techie stuff in the near future. So likely, in fact, I will be reaching out again. But beyond that, really wishing you all the very best.
Well, thank you kindly, and look out for an announcement on our entry into the United States. It's a very special occasion for me, particularly given that it was confirmed just with hours to go before my 1-year anniversary of having incorporated the company. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect with folks who are looking for that kind of guidance. And good luck to everybody out there.
Wonderful. And if there are people who are looking for mentorship, looking for some sort of guidance, want to get into the tech space, the hope is that you're accessible to some extent, or you can direct them to people who might be able to help them move forward.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my LinkedIn, there's probably about 1,000 people on my LinkedIn profile, which I know is nowhere near your level of popularity, but we strive to get there.
Every journey starts with a step, they say. No, it's been a joy. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thanks, Mucha.